My name is Evelyne Leeuw. I'm just facilitating this interactive panel. So I have essentially nothing to say except to introduce myself. I'm a professor here at SPUM. I am in charge of the Chaire d'Excellence de Recherche Canada in One Urban Health, which looks at the governance of ecological and human health in urban environments. And I arrived here from Australia. So I'm very happy to speak English because that's only my third language. If I would have to do it in French, that would be my sixth language. I will hand over to our lovely panelists who are going to do a little presentation up front here. The rest of us will be around here. And then it is an interactive conference, so make notes, start thinking, and prepare your questions or your mysteries after the presentations. Sara, you're first.
No. But Gonzalo said.
Okay, so I'm facilitating perfectly well here. Gonzalo.
I want to thank Malik and his team for inviting us to present our work. One disclaimer, I don't know anything about food. I'm learning a lot and I'm very interested in learning more. But I have had the privilege of leading a project with real experts on food, such as Sara, Miriam, and many others, and Benjamin. And I have had the pleasure of leading this project for 4 years. And what we have organized for you guys today is a small presentation of what we have done with our partners in Latin America and with real experts on the ground and with local leaders in, as you will see, a few countries in Latin America. So thank you very much for this invitation. And now I hand the microphone to Benjamin to introduce the project.
Hello everybody. Je suis Benjamin Herazo, je travaille comme conseiller en recherche à l'école d'architecture de l'Université de Montréal ici. And today we're going to present this project that calls SUSTENTO. It's a project that we have been working for 4 years in Latin America. Well, we all know that the pandemic, crisis, and disaster, among other events, have amplified existing poverty, inequality, and food insecurity, particularly affecting informal settlements. These communities, yes, already marginalized, have experienced exacerbated structural vulnerabilities, particularly regarding access to nutritious food. Our interest is in addressing these issues, in particular focused on spatial dimensions at various scales, including architectural design, urban planning, and public space management. The urgency of addressing this systematic vulnerability led us to develop the SUSTENTO project, aimed to a strengthened alternative food system to enhance resilience within informal urban contexts across Latin America and the Caribbean. First of all, I want to introduce you what we think when we talk about informal settlements. When we talk about informal settlements, we talk about that our urban communities built incrementally by residents who self-manage housing and basic service under precarious conditions, typically located in areas, in vulnerable areas to natural hazards. These settlements result from socioeconomic exclusion and inadequate public policies. Despite these vulnerabilities, residents exhibit considerable resilience and organization capacities, developing creative solutions and strategy to address challenge. SUSTENTO builds upon vulnerability inside, SUSTENTO inside, and leading from our previous project, ADAPTO, which focuses on developing resilience strategies in informal urban areas impacted by the climate change. ADAPTO, our previous project, highlight the importance of local agency and participatory methodologies. It is demonstrated clearly that sustainable resilience buildings comes from co-creating knowledge and solutions from community members themselves, thus laying the groundwork for SUSTENTO's methodological approach. Talking about the methodological approach, our theoretical framework positions vulnerability in informal settlements as resulting from complex interactions among social environment and structural factors. Structural roots causes includes inequalities, exclusion, and injustices. These roots causes amplify the impacts of climate-related triggers such as floods, storms, and droughts, resulting in several socioeconomic and cultural consequences, including poverty, food insecurity, and social isolations. At the heart of this framework, like the community's inherent strengths, such as local knowledge, leadership, and social cohesion, SUSTENTO aims to leverage to create resilient food systems. With this foundation, the SUSTENTO primary objective has to be to bolster the resilience of alternative food systems within informal settlements. Our project aims to empower communities, forest autonomy in local food productions and distributions, and strengthen community networks through collaborative action research methods. The SUSTENTO focuses on multiple locations in Latin America, in Bogotá, in Valdivia, in Cali, in Quito, Cienfuegos in Cuba, and Concepción in Chile. Using a mixed methods approach, we carry out surveys, interviews, participant observations, and collaborative workshops. Each site developed specific micro-projects tailored to local contexts, such as urban agricultural initiative, community gardening, pedagogical collaborations, environmental education programs, composting, and vertical gardens, among others. This diversity jet construction approach allowed us to capture rich quality data while providing robust comparative analysis across the region. We talk about around 22 researchers around Latin America, that I said, from Cuba, Cienfuegos, and Valdivia, Usme, and Siloé in Colombia, Quito, Ecuador, and Concepción in Chile. Those are the universities that participate in the program. Universidad Javeriana, de Corporación Presentes, FLACSO, Universidad Central Las Villas de Cuba, Universidad del Valle de Cali, Colombia, y la Universidad del Biobío en Concepción. Those are the different stakeholders that participate in the program, funded by the IDRC and working with the UNESCO. And we have external universities from Montreal, McGill, University of Montreal, and Concordia. That was the consortium that we call Off the Rable. And we work with our local partners in the different Latin American cities. We implemented interactive and participatory active research methods, emphasizing continuous community involvement. This approach entailed collaborative workshops where community members identify problems, co-create solutions, and directly participate in implementing and adapting these solutions. Regular feedback loops ensures the relevance and effectiveness of interventions, fostering ownerships and local empowerment. Those initiatives that we work on, the 20 initiatives that we work in the different places, we call that artifacts. Artifacts for us means that these artifacts of disaster risk reduction in informal settlements are a critical outcome of our research, our action research methodology in what we call artifacts. These artifacts are both tangible and intangible community-generated solutions aimed at reducing disaster risk and improving food security. Examples include urban gardens, community kitchens, rainwater harvesting system, and organizational tools that enhance social cohesion and collective actions. These artifacts serve not only to practical purpose, but also as symbolic imitations of local knowledge, community resilience, and empowerment in facing social and environmental challenge. These artifacts highlight the dynamic interplay between individual actions and collective community efforts, setting the stage for a deeper theoretical exploration. To understand further the motivation behind the community-driven actions as well as theoretical frameworks around resistance accessibility, I will invite now Sara to continue with the insight presentation.
Good morning. I'm Sara. I'm an environmental social scientist from Ecuador, and my part of the talk will focus on the theoretical framework of the project. But before that, these informal settlements, while they are very vulnerable to risk, they are also like the places where alternatives also emerge. In this case, what we call alternative food systems or bottom-up food initiatives. And especially the women are the ones who are leading these initiatives. So our conceptualization about alternative food systems is, we understand them as living assemblages between human and not human actors that are continually shaped and reshaped by the interactions of those ones that make them up. So this image, you can see an urban or peri-urban food network. You can see the community or the residents that participate, but also you need to understand the NGOs that are also part of the network. FLACSO as academics as well, but also non-human agents as the space, the land, the water that it's needed in order to cultivate, in this case, gardens. Under these conceptualizations, this network escape from the conventional dichotomies, such as conventional versus alternative practices, or rural spaces versus urban places, or people who produce versus who consume, formal versus informal governance arrangements, collective versus individual practices or activities, and what we also discuss a lot, acts of resistance versus acts of existence. By these two concepts, when we said that these struggles respond to resistance actions, we are understanding that the actors frame their actions as struggles against maybe like the corporate food systems, like in political terms, but also maybe they respond for like more pragmatic reasons, like just trying to solve the needs, the contradictions, like the needs that they face. But also these alternative food networks are dynamics, as well that they emerge, stabilize, but they also can disarticulate over time. So these are very dynamics. Okay, in order to characterize the alternative food networks, it's important to understand who participates, where they operate, how they function, why do they emerge, what are the outcomes in social, environmental, and individual and collective well-being. But also which materialities, in this case the artifacts that Benjamin was telling, but also the new subjectivities that emerge among humans, but also between humans and non-humans. I will illustrate this theoretical framework with a case from Ecuador. It's called 60 y Piquito. It's 60 years old and more. It's managed by elders. But before explaining this case in detail, well, this is the network. I will play a small video of the real case so you can grasp like the real characters and actors of this initiative.
Había gente que no tenía para nada, les ayudábamos con tablitas y así. Entonces una compañera que se hizo unas paredes de chamba, o sea, sacaba cuadritos de la tierra y le hizo paredes. Y encima tenía un plástico así. O sea, la gente se dio los modos, el requisito era venir a vivir aquí. Desde hoy les vamos a llamar microsport porque vamos a luchar.
Tengo 75 años, ¿sí? Entonces creo que ya sí pertenezco al 68, muy pequitos. Mi proyecto es voy a sembrar la lechuga, la cebolla, la col, la selga, eso va a ser.
Y en la otra época sembramos maíz, habas y así variando. A Dios gracias, están las verduras están lindas, fresquitas.
Una pala, lo que sea, pues, se le remueve.
¿Remover la tierra?
Sí, este polvo es cal agrícola o cal vivo.
Ya.
Este vamos a colocar, pero ya cuando empiecen las nuevas lluvias y vayamos a sembrar, es para desinfectar el suelo.
Mas antes no teníamos todo ese conocimiento que ahora tenemos, que nos ha enseñado los nutrientes, contra las plagas, que nos ha dado todas esas cosas para poder combatir las plagas que hay aquí en los terrenos.
Sí, con la mano.
Claro, con la mano.
Cuando uno se está deprimido en la casa, se sube al huerto y tú ya conversas con las plantas, ya raspas por un lado, otro lado, conversas con ellas y cuando menos se acuerda tú te sientes liberada de todos los problemas que has tenido.
Nos desestresamos, llega el vecino de aquel lado, el otro, ya conversamos, vemos cómo están los de ellos, cómo están nosotros y por ahí nos compartimos igual.
Sí, no, muy contenta de estar con la compañera aquí y también de compartir lo que he sembrado en el pueblo. Que se conserve bien.
El hecho de estar aquí en la naturaleza es maravilloso, porque nosotros sabemos que en las casas es todo pavimento, todo cerrado y nos ha ayudado para estar más alegres, contentos. Al comerse una lechuga de aquí es más satisfactoria que cuando vaya y compra, ¿no? Porque como que se siente solo una cáscara, algo así. Y cuando se lleva de aquí las cosas es más rica, se le siente más rica. ¿Será porque nosotros nos cultivamos también?
Mi esposa viene a sacar la cebolla, así lo que el resto me había la col, la selga. Recién antes ya llevamos todo ya. Entonces eso es lo que pasa de mi esposa, doctora. Sí, pues ya como ya vienen las ahorita ya me voy a descansar. Sí, desde las 6 de la mañana estoy aquí. Bueno, gracias. ¿No?
Okay. So, I mean, you can see in the video that the key participants or the leaders are elder people, especially women from a low-income neighborhood. So in this network we have, and you can see that the gardeners are, I will explain this later, sorry. I just want to show that you have the residents, but as well, like us as academics, this was part of the, like, one of our students was the one who helped or trained this urban garden in agroecological production. But also they have support from the NGO Red Cross and also like a municipal-led urban program, which is called Conquito. So where this urban garden is located, so as you can see, this is a very steep piece of land. So the way that they cultivate is adapted to this space. And also, I mean, even this is a collective initiative because there is a small committee who manages the space, but the production part is done at family level, especially at individual level. So there are 36 gardens active. Normally it's one person who is in charge of each plot. The area range between 60 and 100 square meters, and they produce agroecologically. And it's interesting because even if they manage the plots in a family way, half of the people at least do one activity in a collective way. Maybe it's the use of the tools, or maybe exchange seeds, or also produce bio inputs in a collective way. But also it reflects that there are tensions between the individual and the collective cooperations among themselves. But and when we ask them why they are engaging in this initiative, most of the main reasons, we would say that it responds to acts of existence. I mean, they want to have access to nutritious food, also to save money because they don't have to buy food, also for health issues, and also for emotional well-being, but also mainly the leaders also frame their acts as a fight to have access to green spaces in the city. But also when we see the outcomes, there are many outcomes. I just want to focus on the discussion about the degree of alternativeness of this initiative. So when we see the social relations of the food transactions, what we see is that there is no market transactions among this initiative. There is also, there are bartering, there are food that is given as a gift. There are also donations. So 93% of the participants do this kind of transactions. So we can say that this network, it's alternative in the sense that it has become a food procurement network based on friendship, generosity, and solidarity. But also it's a space for self-valoration. I mean, these old people, through this space, can have a common old age worthy of being life. So this is very important for themselves. This is the social network that emerged only for vegetables that are exchanged among themselves, among the gardens, only as a gifts. So you can see that there are some families that exchange more than others, but most of them, or the majority, participate. So finally, when we see the new materialities, we can see that now they have an urban garden, but also when, as you see in the testimonies, you have subjectives in common. I mean, when they talk about that, they talk with the crops, and the new like to be in common, like a subjectivity has emerged, not only between themselves, like neighbors, but also with, in this case, with the plants, which is very important outcome as well.
Well, I'm going to tell you a little bit of what we have found when we compare the results from Quito with results from Cuba, Colombia, and Concepcion. So we have been able to draw what we could call kind of meta patterns that kind of transcend despite differences in each of these contexts. One of the things that we have found, and I have learned, as I told you before, I didn't know many of these things I'm saying today, is that food systems are spaces where tensions easily emerge. There are many reasons why there are tensions, but there are tensions in knowledge, in academia, as much as there are tensions on the ground and happening in practice. Just in terms of academia, for example, we tend to use different frameworks. If we discuss about different framings that we're using today, maybe we would have 5 or 6 different representations and narratives going on at the same time. And sometimes they overlap, but there are also differences between them. And that makes it sometimes difficult to understand exactly what we mean and what we're trying to achieve and what our objectives are. So of course, there are people interested in food production and distribution, and usually that we associate that with the paradigm of food security. But there are also different other objectives playing on the ground, both in terms of academia and in terms of what is happening on the ground. So there is intentions of stability, economic stability, or system stability. There are intentions of collective benefits or environmental benefits as well. And of course, there are issues of values and ideals, social ideals that we're trying to mobilize as well. So we could see them as different vectors that eventually sometimes overlap, but also create tensions on what people really want to achieve. And that's something we have found very often in the different projects we've done. So if we were able to put together all these different framings in considering there's similarities, but also there are differences, we'll see that not everybody are talking about the same thing, and not everybody is doing or engaging in alternative food systems for the same reasons. And that creates some tensions that are interesting for us. And that, to be honest, and to be clear, we don't see it necessarily as something negative. The fact that there are tensions also reveal different objectives, and that's part of society, and that's part of culture, right? So in any case, despite all these differences, what we have found as a common pattern, regardless if we're talking in Cuba or Chile or Ecuador, is that there are these ideas of challenging the who, the how, the where, the when, and the why. There is a constant interest among local leaders and residents on challenging who's doing what, how we're doing this, where we're doing it. And that, for me as an architect, is a very particularly interesting aspect, because that challenges ideas of place, of home, of neighborhood. But it's also challenging the when. Temporalities are also key. And these actors are interested in challenging the traditional temporalities, and as well the why. So there is a constant defiance. But not everybody is fighting the same thing or the same system. Actors are fighting and have different acts of resistance in the face of different conditions. You can imagine, of course, that a farmer, urban farmer in Quito is not challenging the government the same way that a resident in Cuba is challenging her own government. There are, of course, governance issues that makes it different. But despite of that, what we have found is that people engage in alternative food systems for several motivations, and many of them have nothing to do with food, or very little to do with food. In many cases, it's about socialization, as this woman said in the video. Oh, we come here and we feel relief, and it's kind of a psychological therapy for her to go and and practice some urban agriculture. But there is also environmental protection. There's others that are interested in crime reduction. That is particularly critical in Colombia, for example, where women find a secure space where they can be among women and maybe be away from crime and violence that happens either at home or in the streets. Maintaining cultural traditions, that's something very important for many of them. Dealing with psychological distress and isolation. That's particularly interesting, for example, for the elders who find in alternative food systems a way of connecting with youngsters or connecting with themselves and not being alone at home, of course. But there is also different perceptions of alternative food systems. So let me say it differently. We found that not many people, not necessarily all these folks interested in food, were doing it for food. They were doing it for many reasons. But then that kind of puzzled us. Why are they not? Why exactly? Well, one of the things that we found, and I think you're going to find it interesting, is that local residents and local leaders tend to see food systems, their own food systems, more positively than externals. And you guess who tends to have the most pejorative view of their own food systems? We, academics. It's very funny but it's very interesting at the same time, that locals tend to have a better perception in terms of, you name it, how you frame it. Frame it in terms of quality, quantity, frequency, regardless of how we pose the question. There was always a more positive perspective of their own systems from locals than from externals. And experts, well, let's call it experts, but in reality, what we really meant is people from NGOs and academics tend to have a more negative perspective, regardless, again, of how you frame the question. And that happens in many countries. In Cuba, for very particular political reasons, we had to change a little bit our questionnaires. So we wanted to know also if that pattern applied to Cuba, and it does. Even in Cuba, where people are a little bit reluctant on criticizing the government openly for obvious or not so obvious reasons, but they do. Even in Cuba, locals tend to have a more positive perspective of what is going on the ground than externals. So what we found is that, of course, there is a struggle, but that struggle is different. Of course, the struggle in Cuba is not the same struggle as in neoliberal Colombia or neoliberal Chile, but that struggle has kind of two main components. And Sara already mentioned a little bit of this, it is at the same time an act of resistance against sometimes the agro system, resistance against government, resistance against manipulation and segregation and historical exclusion and so on. But sometimes not all these local leaders are interested in going and demonstrating on the streets. Sometimes they're doing this in a more individual, internal, reflective way that Miriam calls collective acts of resistance. And I love that because it's not only, this is the resistance part, the collective acts of resistance, but what Miriam would call the individual acts of existence. And I find this fascinating because it's kind of two components of the same thing. On the one side, there is something about collectively challenging the system, but it's also sometimes very pragmatic. Sometimes it's about, as Sara was saying, dealing with food for tomorrow, or reflecting on how I want my family to eat, or reflecting on who I am as a citizen, or what type of relationship I want with my territory. And sometimes it not necessarily has to do with fighting the big Goliath as a small David. Sometimes it's just reflecting on my own personal experience and redefining my existence from very pragmatic acts on daily life. So it's way more complicated than sometimes we tend to think about these systems. In conclusions, local food production helps to reduce risk. That's something we hypothesized in the beginning, but not necessarily for the reasons we thought. Not necessarily because people are going to have more food in terms of a new pandemic, or not necessarily because they are systematically eating better, but sometimes because their food systems help create the networks, the connections, the dialogues, the narratives that eventually help these folks face new hazards, even those challenged or enhanced by climate change. Basing urban agriculture programs on food security or climate adaptation per se would be therefore naive. We cannot think that we're going to solve these problems just by doing that, at least not in a very direct way as we initially thought. Urban agriculture programs must address those tensions because those tensions are part of how they operate and how they work. And those spaces do create these artifacts, as Benjamin was saying, but these artifacts are constantly negotiated because there are differences between people. They have to be constantly negotiated. Sometimes they work, others disappear. Some of the artifacts we funded and supported have already disappeared because tensions were too high or because people lost interest or because of many other reasons. So these are spaces where decisions are negotiated, where narratives are negotiated, where resources are negotiated, and where space is negotiated. As you can imagine, in an informal settlement in Quito, space is a very rare commodity. So, and that space it's a competition. There is a constant competition for the use of that space. So having a garden is in competition with other uses that space could have. So it has to be negotiated. Stabilizing those systems is therefore difficult. I would say almost impossible. Like they're never fully stabilized. There are always negotiations and discussions. And it's like a very dynamic, as Sara said, a very dynamic, constantly dynamic system. But in that negotiation, some ingredients are key. Trust, legitimacy, emotions are key, and governance. Emotions are very important. These local leaders, these activists on the ground, they're working, the main resource they have is emotions, and they will use those emotions in a constant way to negotiate and achieve their objectives and discuss them with other stakeholders. This means that more research is needed. We need to keep doing this, I guess. We need to keep explaining those differences. We need to keep finding patterns, but also explaining the differences. Of course, ideas, narratives, and frameworks overlap, and that's why we are all here, because there is something we have in common, but that doesn't mean that we fully agree on all the aspects of our objectives or means or interests or values and so on. So we need to keep digging on what is exactly what I'm trying to say and how is that different at the same time similar to what another person is saying. Those new frameworks must therefore embrace that complexity. We cannot simplify it. And you can imagine in my field, which is urban planning and architecture, there tends to be an oversimplification of things related with urban agriculture. Oh, we're going to put a garden and it's going to work fine. Or we're just going to leave enough space and somehow it will emerge spontaneously. Well, I'm telling now urban planners and my colleagues, well, it doesn't happen that way. Just don't think about it that way because it's not going to work. It's way more complex than that. And not because you just simply design it in your plan is going to work in that way. So it is necessary to align policy and implementation. In most of the places we're working, to be honest, policy is fine. There are things to improve, but policy is there. The problem is implementation. The policy is relatively good. There are relatively good policy on food security in Ecuador, in Colombia, in Cuba, and in Chile. The problem is that it's not being implemented because people are not understanding that legitimacy, trust, conflicts, tensions are part of the equation. So politicians, NGOs are oversimplifying the problem, trying to implement it faster, but not necessarily embracing the complexity that it requires. And we shouldn't forget that there are these two ingredients of local agency, a collective act of resistance, but also a very individual and sometimes reflective and and personal acts of existence, where people reposition themselves while at the same time trying to challenge the system. Thank you very much. That's what we have found.
Thank you. Wow, what a rich story, and what a fantastic project. And it made me realize that, well, maybe you think that this happens in Latin and South America, but this happens everywhere. I told you that I came from Australia. We do this in Sydney. But there the challenge is what is public and private space? Because people want to expand. You know, community gardens, are they public or private? What if you start planting tomatoes in front of your house and someone picks your tomato? Is that a public act or a private act, or this struggle? And I really, really appreciate that. Let's be interactive. So, do you have to ask each other anything now? No, you don't. No, they know each other well. So I'm facilitating a discussion here, and yes, I will walk around.
Do you want the headcast so you don't have to keep passing?
No, I will walk around.
Thank you for sharing the project. Very, very, very interesting. I wanted to maybe ask a question more on the implications and looking into the future again. So I'm interested if you can elaborate more on what you feel are the necessary next steps. So you mentioned policy, you mentioned a few different dimensions. So what do you think are the next questions or the next type of research we need to be focusing on, whether for yourself in your own project or for other people who are about to start similar projects and are focusing on those aspects? So I just wanted to know more like those future implications.
Go, you each have a microphone, so I'm standing here to survey the crowd.
Well, let me tell you a little bit of why IDRC came to us, because that's part of the answer. They came because they have a food program that exists for many years, but they found that sometimes that food program was focusing too much on, let's say, food security, and they wanted to explore alternative ways. That's why they came to us, and because we didn't know much about food, but we know about cities, they wanted to know what we think about urban systems in cities, within the city. And the premise, to be honest, in the beginning was these countries need better policy. And to be honest with you, I'm about to tell them at the end of the project, no. The policy is written. Ecuador has a good policy. In Colombia, there are gender policies that are very interesting in paper. Resilience policies that are very interesting in paper. Cuba has an excellent urban agriculture policy in paper, very good housing policy in paper, and so on. The problem is that is not translating into changes in informal settlements, because people are underestimating the complexity of the things. So NGOs are coming and saying, okay, we're going to do this and that, without tackling how these tensions, these complexities, these negotiations, and so on. So I guess the next steps is not necessarily writing more policy. There are adjustments to be made, for sure, but that's not up for, I think, the main issue. The main issue is, next steps is recognizing differences, recognizing similarities, creating governance structures where they can be discussed and exchanged, and implement measures where implementation is key. And implementation goes through, as Sara said before, these local leaders, these women who are doing excellent things on the ground, who do not have the voice, who don't necessarily have the resources, who are sometimes neglected, victims of crime and violence, and so on. So implementation needs to be done with these women and local leaders on the ground, understanding very, very deeply the dynamics that we mentioned before.
Thanks. I'm coming to you, Malek, and first I have a question here, but let me observe as a political scientist, if a policy is hard to implement, it's a bad policy.
Bonjour. Je ne sais pas s'il y a quelqu'un qui va traduire. Oui. D'accord. Oui, bonjour et merci pour la présentation. Moi-même, je viens d'Haïti. Donc, je trouve que c'est très intéressant cette expérience d'agriculture urbaine. Mais par rapport aux populations qui ont participé, là, j'ai surtout vu beaucoup de femmes et des personnes âgées. Donc, j'aimerais savoir qu'en est-il par rapport aux jeunes. Ça, c'est un premier point. Deuxième point, par exemple, on sait qu'il y a beaucoup de gens qui viennent des milieux ruraux pour venir dans les villes. Donc, c'est qui est-ce qu'on peut retrouver? C'est beaucoup plus des personnes qui viennent des milieux ruraux, qui sont en ville, qui vont participer à ces initiatives. Et en troisième lieu, on a parlé un peu de certains défis, par exemple, pour négocier des espaces. Est-ce qu'il y a aussi des défis par rapport à l'eau pour pouvoir maintenir ce type d'agriculture? Merci.
Benjamin, Sara.
Yo veo que participan muchas mujeres y adultos mayores, pero ¿qué pasa con los jóvenes? ¿Dónde están los jóvenes? Y muchos vienen de la zona rural, pero también hay otros perfiles. Y que hay negociación del espacio, pero también hay otras negociaciones que la
I will speak for the Ecuadorian case. This is true that young people are not participating much. There are some families that the children participate, but very rarely. And in our case, our food initiatives, because we saw that in that neighbor, we didn't want just to focus on urban agriculture. We tried to do to engage in other initiatives with the young people. So instead of saying, okay, let's participate in this urban agriculture, we decided to use, for instance, the social media. So one of the initiatives that young people were interested was training them to use the social media to talk about the food system of their neighbors. So be aware about how is the food system in that neighbor. How many shops are there? Are they selling ultra-processed food or not? Do you buy this food or not? So our idea was to train young people who would be interested to maybe keep posting and talking about these problems in the neighborhood. I would say that the results are not so we expected more continuity and better results. It's difficult to work with young people. Elders are more organized. They are used to participate in communal work and things like that. But I think that we engage these other participants, maybe young people, through other kind of initiatives. And in the end, I think that they change a little bit their habits of food as well.
Je vais te compter en français. Et pour les autres cas, et dans les différents pays comme Cuba, Colombie ou Chili, il y a aussi les mêmes problèmes avec les personnes âgées, les femmes et les enfants. Il n'y a pas beaucoup de participation des personnes, des enfants, oui, des personnes plus jeunes. C'est rare qu'ils participent. Cependant, ça dépend de l'outil qu'on peut utiliser, qu'ils commencent à rentrer dans cet esprit. C'est-à-dire, en Colombie, on a trouvé, par exemple, que le sport, oui, c'est une manière de ramasser les enfants, ramasser les gens autour d'une activité. Et ça les permet, comme disait Gonzalo, d'être à part de la criminalité et des autres activités. Mais aussi que le sport, il vient des autres activités à côté, comme l'agriculture urbaine. Il regarde qu'il peut, à côté de cette activité sportive, il peut commencer à développer des autres activités en même temps. Même s'il n'a pas beaucoup aimé au début cette activité, parce que c'est une activité, on les considère dans les études comme des activités plus pour les femmes que pour les gens. Oui. Mais toujours à côté d'une bonne activité comme des activités pédagogiques, des activités sportives, il commence à se ramasser de plus en plus.
Thanks. Yeah. I have Malek and then there and then Malek.
Thank you, Evelyne. And thank you, the three of you, for an amazing presentation. Just a reflection, a thought that we know Gonzalo and Benjamin through Ecuador before knowing them through Université de Montréal. So it's a thought for the future to look inside our ecosystem to see who we can work with. I was quite taken aback by the naivete that you mentioned about how we engage in such programs. And I'm wondering whether it is a reflection of the NGO world, because usually this is, organized by NGOs and then academics come and study them, or maybe not. It's not the case particularly in this project, but is it a situation where, we are too specialized? Either people are working on poverty, or they're working on the environment, or they're working on food, and the kind of complexity that it is required because of how people view their food system, how they interact with it. All these tensions that you talked about. It's individual, it's communal. It is because of wanting more food, but it's also because of wanting to garden and be outside. So what is your reflection about these things? Thank you.
Yeah, NGOs might sometimes not help, but also the fragmentations, the multiple fragmentations among stakeholders certainly do not help either. So, for example, in Cuba, in paper, the policy for urban agriculture is very good, but then you go and see by laws on housing, and it's almost impossible to have a garden legally. So even the housing policy is not well aligned with the food policy. So both are okay, but when you put them together, it's very difficult for these women to have a garden in an area that belongs to the state. So the issues of private-public becomes very tricky, and so on. So fragmentations among stakeholders is certainly a problem. Fragmentations among NGOs, among departments, sometimes between the paliers gouvernementaux, the governance levels. A certain urban policy in Bogota or in Uzme is in contradiction with the regional policy, which is in contradiction with the national policy. So again, fragmentation not only horizontally but also vertically. So that doesn't help either.
Thanks. Just a quick reflection on earlier questions. A friend of mine has been doing research in one of the largest slums in the world, Kibera, near Nairobi. And there he found that technology, mobile phones, social media, really empowers young people and women to take control. And they organize their own sanitation systems and their own food security systems. So there is still opportunity, I would say.
In English? In English is better? Yeah, oui? Oui? Okay. So my name is Jean-Claude. Thank you for your presentation. I wonder, the people that you've interviewed, specifically the farmers, for example, what's their feeling about their government? Do they feel the government is creating an enabling environment or a disabling environment? How much support do they feel they have from their own government? Thank you.
Je voudrais parler des cas particuliers, par exemple de la Colombie, dans lesquels il y a une certaine... Ça dépend du contexte. On a en Colombie 3 cas dans différentes villes et de différentes tailles. Oui, à Bogota, Uzme, que c'est une région plus rurale qu'urbaine. à Cali, que c'est plus urbain, mais aussi à Valdivia, que c'est un espace plus rural. Et ça dépend dans chacune la relation avec les gouvernements. Oui, ça change beaucoup parce que comme venait de dire Gonzalo, l'alignement, c'est pas les mêmes dans les trois cas. Oui, la relation avec les personnes qui sont plus à côté de cette réglementation, des fois, ils regardent, ils sont dans un regard à court terme. C'est-à-dire, les politiciens, ils regardent qu'est-ce qu'ils vont ramener des votes et des éléments à court terme. Oui. Mais cependant, il y a des autres politiciens, des autres gouverneurs qui regardent plus loin et qui voulaient rester plus de temps. Et ils considèrent cette leader communautaire comme une personne qui va donner des votes à long terme. C'est-à-dire, ils les regardent plus comme un investissement politique. Oui. Et ça change la manière comment ils se relationnent. Et je pense que c'est tout relatif, cette réponse reliée à qu'est-ce qu'il passe dans chaque contexte.
Yeah, it's very contextual. Yes, is this a response to this immediately? Because I have 3 other questions. So if it's a new one, then I'm afraid you'll drop off.
So I wanted to further explore the conversation of resistance and existence. First off, I'd suggest that resistance is not necessarily collective any more than existence is individual. They can be simultaneously both. And we've had a lot of concerns in the agroecology movements in Latin America since the 80s about the sort of co-option of agroecology and how it's been understood or explained, particularly by NGOs or academics, in a sense of creating a very normative movement. The resistance movement is described as often a fight against, and the notion that the state is what determines policy, course of action, which of course we know is normally not desirable, particularly as states become focused on private interests and don't necessarily focus on the public's interest. And they close space through privatization of seeds, genetic resources, privatization of water, land, etc., and the problems that creates. So what I'm thinking of is this existence. The imaginary of resistance has blinded us, I think, to how people create margins and create change in a rich community like Lucha de los Pobres. And so the question I have is, what opportunities did you see in this space where people living in the margins, let's say the ruins of capitalism, in this urban poor neighborhood, and how they create space for change against the government? That's what we call this existence, when people get on with the tension between what I want and what's possible, and they make things happen. So if we look at existence as this pragmatic resource, right, of creativity, where these seemingly disempowered victims make things happen and solve their food problems and eat another day. What opportunities do you see? And particularly, you talked about the production aspect of food as, I think, a counter movement, which it is, which is inspiring, creating a space, reclaiming public space and putting it to work to solve a nutritional interest or maybe a cultural interest. What other food-related spaces did you see? Because you didn't talk about things like markets or cooking in the household. What other existential counter movements are you finding? And what can we learn from that creativity? What can we invest in to help promote the sort of social change or socio-biological change that we're seeking?
Well, so
to be clear,
shall we take another hour?
Yeah. Yeah, to be clear,
I have 2 more questions, and then I'm eating into lunch a little bit. But
yeah, of course, these forms of agency never happen exclusively individually or socially. There is always a mix of things. But a woman in Uzme, for example, would say, "I would do this because yo soy campesina. It starts from I am, who I am. It's a form of agency that starts from mi padre fue campesino, yo soy campesina, uso botas de caucho, y este es mi territorio. It starts from a reflection on who I am. Of course, it eventually expands to other things, what my family is, what my kinship is, and what I want my family to be in the future. But the stance is usually, in the narratives we observe, start from who I am. Soy un campesino, soy una campesina, reivindico mi identidad como pescador en Cuba. Reivindico ante todo que soy pescador porque mi padre fue pescador, porque mi abuelo fue pescador. Entonces, so you understand, it doesn't mean that it's only individual, but it starts from a perspective of identity and then expands to other things, expands to what my family is, what my community is. So I would say that those spaces are constantly like that. It's a constant dialogue between who I am, what my community is, what the policy is, what the state is, how I feel about the state. It's obviously always very dynamic.
Yeah. Context, again. Identification and context. Yeah. I discouraged one intervention. Thank you for giving up your time.
Yeah, thank you for the presentation on the project that you guys talked about. I was just wondering, you guys mentioned tensions and negotiations happening, and I believe that's really important to make these systems sustainable. I was just wondering, what does it look like, the negotiation itself on the field?
Well, for instance, for this Ecuadorian case, which was like a collective urban garden, the main tensions are like people accuse each other about stealing things, or maybe they don't want to share tools because I don't know, some people don't take care of them as well as they should, or maybe they don't have enough plants or seeds to share, some things like that. So in this specific, but at the same time, when we ask them, would you like to work more collectively to share and to, I don't know, to be, I mean, and even one of the main reasons was for doing this is to be more, I mean, to strengthen the social ties of the community. So sometimes, I mean, you have these tensions, and in this case, you have like half of the participants working together and half of the participants don't working together. So, I mean, I attended some of the meetings where they discuss, and it's part of the social thing. So, I mean, they make some arrangements, but are always tensions coming up for different things. But in the end, they are together. And as Gonzalo said, they are very proud about being the neighbor. I didn't say it, it's called La Lucha de los Pobres, because it was a former hacienda, a big estate. So they invited that land, and after they created a housing cooperative, and over the years they became a neighbor of Quito. So they have been fighting for services like water, roads, and all these things. And now, I mean, the elders are the ones who did all this process, this political process. And now they are like old people, and they said, okay, we want also to fight for green spaces. We didn't plan that in our cooperative, housing cooperative. So you have these older leaders that they have the power, and you have also the young leaders that they don't feel the space to become like a leader. And you have these tensions as well a lot. And I think in the other case, cases you have that. And we have initiatives that, like the young leaders renounce to stop because they didn't feel enough supported by the older leaders. So even us as academics, we didn't want to take part, like who has the reasons. So we are there also and trying to understand all the points of views. So this was difficult as well. To manage the situation.
Thank you. We need to wrap up. I just want to ask one concluding remark or question, because obviously you would have needed your own conference. So when is that going to happen? And if we want to get that book that you showed in your presentation or any other information, is there a website? Do we need to surround you during the break and say, where is all this richness? How do we get more information?
There is a website. The website has the Artefacts book online. It's available to everybody, by the way. And we just finished 2 articles, which are open access with the results we showed today. So they're there. And our project is finishing in November. So we're going to be running an online activity to be able to reach Latin America. So you will certainly hear from us about that. Thank you.
Fantastic. No, this was incredibly rich and enlightening and empowering even for us experts who tend to rate initiatives less than people themselves. So that's fantastic. Please join me in thanking the project and the 3 of you.